All right, welcome to week 8. We're going to be looking at families, and particularly in this part 1, we're going to look at families in a global perspective. So just looking at families generally. Now this chapter is just a part of sociology, but it is one of the few chapters that also has a specific sociological perspectives and theories associated with it. In fact, it's a separate division of sociology. So for example, we're taking Sociology 2, there was a Sociology 1, but there is also family sociology as an independent study. So this is only going to be a sort of a really gloss over on family issues. I do teach a family sociology class, and we do look at a much more broad perspective about family. So we're going to look at developing intimate relationships and establishing families, and what's the process and how we go about that. We're also going to look at child-rearing, child-related family issues in parenting. Now again, this is going to be just a really brief overview, essentially, of family and family as we know it, because it is an independent field of study, and it goes into a great deal more depth about family. So a couple of things you could be asking yourself is, how is social change affecting the Canadian family? What is the Canadian family now compared to maybe what it was in the 50s, even the 70s? You know, why is it difficult to define family? Well, family isn't something that's nailed down with a specific definition. In fact, in Canada, there isn't a single one definition of family. It kind of depends on sets of circumstances and legalities as to what family is by definition. And then lastly, you might want to consider is, how do marriage patterns vary across cultures? And so in this part, we're going to look at mainly those types of topics. So let's get started. In looking at the first part on the family chapter, we're going to begin with families in a global perspective. And we're going to start with defining the family. And then we're going to look at family structure and characteristics, then marriage patterns and patterns of descent and inheritance. And then we'll look at power and authority in families. So we'll begin with defining family variations. Families we choose is one form of family. It's a social arrangement that include intimate relationships between couples and close familial relationships with other couples and adults and children. But the standard sociological definition is a group of people who are related to one another by bonds of blood, marriage, or adoption, and who live together in a form of economic unit and bear and raise children. Families are broadened and more inclusive. Therefore, family, by definition, loose definition at least, consists of relationships in which people live together with commitment, form of an economic unit, and care for any young, and consider their identity to significantly attached to the group which they call family. So if we carry further and look at family structure, kinship is probably the first thing that we consider under family structure. And kinship is the social network of people based on a common ancestry, either through marriage or adoption. And so you're looking at is basically a chart looking at the descending kinship. Now, there are also two family types, if you will. There's the family of orientation. This is the family in which a person, like you, is born, and in which early socialization usually takes place. So the family that you were born in, your mom and dad, that's your family of orientation. Now alternatively, there is what's called a family of procreation. And this is the family that when you meet somebody and have a partner and either have children of your own or adopt children, that's your family of procreation. So the family of orientation is the one you're born into. The family of procreation is the one that you create. Now there's two other forms of family we're considering under structure, and that is the extended family and the nuclear family. The extended family unit is composed of relatives in addition to the parents and children who live in the same household, whereas the nuclear family is composed of one or two parents and their dependent children, all of whom live apart from all the other relatives. And so if we look at marriage and its different forms, if you will, or marriage patterns, we can see So when we think in terms of marriage patterns, we look at marriage, which is a legally recognized and or socially approved arrangement between two individuals that carry certain rights and obligations and usually involve sexual activity. Monogamy, on the other hand, this is essentially a marriage between one person at a time. This is the legal pattern in Canada. And polygamy is where one person marries two or more other people. Now, polygamy, when broken down, you can include polygyny, which is one man and several women, or the alternative is polyandry, one woman with more than one husband. Now, the next kind of component of family we look at is patterns of descent and inheritance. And there's three primary patterns to look at here. The first is patrilineal. This is a system of tracing descent through the father's side of the family. And then alternatively, the matrilineal. This is looking at a system which traces descent through the mother's side of the family. Now, the alternative to both of these is what's known as bilateral system, and this is tracing descent through both the mother and the father's side of the family. And then lastly, we're looking at power and authority in families, and this harkens back to some degree to feminist perspective, and this is where the patriarchal family, this is the family structure in which the authority is held by the eldest male, usually the father. And this has been more the traditional sense of what family is. Now, you'll find lots of patterns of family that still adhere to the patriarchal family style. It's not necessarily that it's bad, but it is still considered the more dominant family, a breakdown of authority and power in a family. Now, matriarchal is the alternative. This is the family structure in which authority is held by the eldest female, usually the mother. And then lastly is an egalitarian, and this is the family structure in which both partners share power and authority. Now, you might argue that this is the pattern, or the pattern that is starting to emerge more, at least in North America, maybe in parts of Europe. Okay. So now we're going to move into is developing intimate relationships and establishing families. Now, love and intimacy is where we're going to start. Cohabitation will follow, marriage, and then household and childcare responsibilities and intimacy. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're going to go over a lot of this kind of on the quick because this is a whole separate study of sociology by itself. So when we begin with love and intimacy, North America, the culture emphasizes romantic love. Romantic love refers to a deep emotion, the satisfaction of a significant needs, the caring for and acceptance of the person we love, and involvement in an intimate relationship. In the 19th century, this was a 19th century social construction where men would work that emphasized their self-reliance, and women were in the home and giving of service in exchange of gifts. Now, gender differences, men tended to express their love through nonverbal actions such as running an errand and the like. Women tend to express their love more verbally. We certainly do see within current relationships a link between love, intimacy, and sexuality, and there are theories on love that include passion, intimacy, and commitment. Now, we all are aware about marriage and perhaps cohabitation. Now, cohabitation is a couple living together without really being legally married. Most common among young people between the ages of 25 and 29. That's about 1 in 6. 33% of families in Quebec are common law families. Quebec is the province with the most common law families. Now, in contrast to marriage, common law unions are less committed than marriage, they appear, or at least feel to the participants, as being less than permanent. About 70% culminate in a marriage. However, 40% of these become divorced within 10 years. Now, those who marry were less satisfied with their marriage than those who did not cohabitate before they were married. And the divorce rates were higher for those who could cohabitate before marriage than those who did not cohabitate before marriage. And so as much as a lot of people do engage in cohabitative behavior, it's not necessarily all bad, but in terms of what is longer lasting, it seems that the tradition of marriage and the associated ceremony and the norm in Canada is still viewed as being, one to get married. So let's look at marriage. Marriage is still very popular in spite of divorce. The majority of marriages still do last a lifetime. So why marry? In love, that's one reason. Companionship, sex, to have children. There's all sorts of reasons that people do choose to get married. Most people marry someone who is in the same social class, in the same religion, in the same race, and of a similar age. And this is known as homogamy. The pattern of individuals marrying those who have similar characteristics such as race, ethnicity, religious background, and education and social class. Now, of course, this isn't necessarily the only means. And in a more diverse world of people traveling and moving from one part of the world to another part of the world, we see more examples of what is known as heterogamy, which is more of this sort of alternative, looking at this sort of cross mating between different religious groups, different educational backgrounds, different ethnicities, and this becomes something that is becoming a little bit more occurrent because of the amount of interaction that occurs between diverse groups. So when we consider now, which is something that happens a lot within families, is the household work and childcare responsibilities. About most families, about 70% are dual earners, families in which both partners are part of the labor force. And this graph here shows the difference between 1976 and 2015 between dual earners, single earners, and non-earners. And you can see over time the amount of dual earners has increased. Okay, now there is also, and it's a very big issue, and it's a very big feminist issue, is what is known as the second shift. And this is the domestic work that is employed women to perform at home and after they complete their work days. So they go to work in the daytime, they come home and they take care of the family, they cook the meals, the kids go to bed. More men are beginning to reduce this double burden that women experience. Women in single-parented families, of course, carry the heaviest burden. Now, this transition to include more support and help for men is a recent addition, and it's starting to happen more frequently. Okay, now let's move on to the next section, which is child-related family issues. And parenting, whether deciding to have children, adoption, the new reproductive technologies, and single-parent households followed by remarriages. So deciding to have children, well, the average fertility rate in Canada is 1.5 per fertile woman between the ages of 15 and 50, and that was in 2007, 1.5. In 2017, the fertility rate is 1.6. So all that really means is that in 2017, for the women between the ages of 15 and 50, those women would have 1.6 children in that fertility range of 15 and 50. Now, back in the 60s, that was 2.8, I believe it was. And so when we look at what is the amount of, what does the fertility rate need to be to just maintain the population as it is, and that's something in the neighborhood of 2.1. So we're not producing, as a nation, if you will, enough children domestically to replace the number of people in Canadian society that would be dying in a given year. So when we think in terms of, also in terms of, the involvement of birth control and other sorts of techniques and strategies, and around many Canadians use some sort of birth control, and as a result there's this element of childlessness, whether it be voluntary or involuntary. So voluntary childlessness are couples who decide not to have children before they marry. They may even choose not to have children throughout their marriage. And so voluntary childlessness can be as a result of having other competing goals and choices, desires. It also can include delaying childlessness for some period of time. I've gone to school, I've started a career, I may not be prepared to have children until later in my life, and that started to happen more frequently. The involuntary childlessness is related to infertility, as not being able to get pregnant and or achieve pregnancy in one's own lifetime, whether that is because of low sperm count in men or with women not producing viable eggs. And so as a result of childlessness, particularly involuntary childlessness, we have other options to explore, and one of those options is adoption. Now, adoption is a legal process through which the rights and duties of parenting are transferred from the child's biological and or legal parents to new legal parents. So why do people look beyond Canada for children? Well, because most available children in North America are perceived as unsuitable, usually because of high behavioral concerns or because of age, older. Also, fewer are available as newborns, and as many single mothers keep their children, in Canada at least, it's not socially unacceptable to be a single mom as it once used to be. And many couples seek out children from Romania, South Korea, China, and India, and demand for children grows, but supplies are diminishing. And so it's become quite a difficult time for those parents who are involuntarily childless. However, there is also another venue to go that's been explored certainly more in the last 10 to 15 years and will continue to likely be explored, and that is the use of new technologies for reproduction. And there's many kinds. You can start off with test tube babies or in vitro fertilization. This is in-glass eggs are taken from the woman and put into a container. Sperm are introduced, and the hope is conception, and the conceived eggs will be implanted back into the woman's uterus. Now, the woman on the right there, Louise Brown, she was the world's first test tube baby back in, I believe it was 1980, could have been 82. Now, alternatively, there is artificial insemination. In utero insemination, a physician inserting directly into the uterus near the time of ovulation. And this could be highly successful. It uses all of what is a part of the couple's body for a child. Now, if for one reason or another those are not reasonable, they are very expensive. One alternative has been surrogacies. There's traditional surrogacy, which is where another woman is artificially inseminated with the father's sperm. And then there's also gestational surrogacy. This is where the sperm and the egg of an infertile couple are transferred to a surrogate using assisted reproductive technologies. Now, this has been highly successful for many people, but it's also brought about many questions. You know, who's the parent? What if the contract is breached? That is to say, what if the surrogate in this case chooses to keep the baby rather than give the baby up? What if the surrogate chooses to stop being a surrogate? Can they have an abortion, for example? There are a few federal laws that have been presented as of yet, not that many. However, there are many proposals to look at these issues as the technology has really evolved and made it more and more challenging for people not to have laws to protect the babies and the parents and the surrogates. Okay. So looking at single-parent households, because this becomes a very common alternative, either through divorce or through death of a partner or through by choice. More than 1 million single parents, families in Canada, of these, 80% are headed by women. One of the largest growing demographics are single-parented families by men, about 8%. Some of the effects of single-parented families. Now, as much as this is not a guarantee, these are statistically and demographically sound observations that have been made. It doesn't apply to all families that are single parents, but it applies to more than maybe we are familiar with. Children in single-parented families are more likely than children in two-parent families to have poor academic achievement, have higher absenteeism, and higher dropout rates. They tend to exhibit higher early marriages. That is, the children of single parents tend to marry earlier than children who are not parented by single parents. And there's a higher divorce rate. There's also an exhibit of more drug and alcohol abuse. Now, as much as we all know people who are successfully single parenting, and these statistics, although accurate, aren't necessarily going to remain this way over time as more couples, as more single parents are not only educated but employed and providing well for their children, that these outcomes might change. Now, men as non-custodial parents, the difficulty in linking to their biological children has been difficult, and having to look at the changing of roles. Who am I if I'm not a day-to-day parent? I'm then the custodial, non-custodial parent, and you don't see your children as frequently. So in family sociology, we look at these issues in far more depth. And then we can also look at, if you're in a single household, you've maybe experienced divorce, you may have lost a partner, and so the potential to remarry is also reasonable outcome. And the rates are greater proportion of men than women will remarry. About 70% of men and about 58% of women will remarry. Creation of blended or step families, if children are present, about 12% of couples with children are in blended families. And parents face problems that are not found from the first-time married families. Issues like norms governing remarriage are ill-defined. Stepfathers, stepmothers, who does what, and what kind of level of discipline, and these dynamics tend to be things that get overlooked in some of the remarriages that involve children and become bigger issues. Okay, that is the end of part 1, and we'll move into part 2 in the next video. Okay, everybody, enjoy the day. We're getting closer to spring too. Bye now.